Hi, my name is Maggie Bollock, and I'm doing assignment 4.4 in the graphic design course comparing cartoon anatomy. And I'm going to be comparing the character Odin Arrow from the webcomic Ava's Demon and the character Wirt from the cartoon Over the Garden Wall. Alright, so looking at the proportions of the body and the head. First we're going to look at Odin. So Odin is almost 6 heads tall, so comparing that to a drawing of a realistic person, that's pretty good for a cartoon character. You'll notice he's got pretty wide shoulders. It's actually kind of tricky to see in this picture, but his shoulders are fairly wide, and his waist is actually kind of small. So that creates a pretty severe angle going from his shoulders down to his hips. Another thing about his torso is that it's actually really, really long. If we're not counting the height from, like, the height Odin gets from his head, almost half of his height is just from his torso alone. Here, wait, that's right from there to about there. So that's almost half, and that's quite a bit for one person. And because his torso is so long, his arms end up being pretty long too, I guess, just because the artist was trying to make that proportionate. And looking at Odin's posture, he has pretty good posture. I mean, he's got a very natural stance. He looks very relaxed. He doesn't have a hunch, he's not crouching, none of that, so he's good there. Alright, now looking at Wirt. So Wirt is only about 3.5 heads tall, and we can't see where his head ends because of his ridiculous looking hat, and I couldn't find a picture of him full body without his hat, so this is as good as I can get. But yeah, comparing his height to Odin's or even a realistic person, like, his height is Odin's almost cut right in half, so that's pretty tiny, I guess. Not his height, but his head to body ratio. And his head is very, very large and very round. It's just kind of a big circle. Doesn't have much of an oval shape to it at all. And he's got a very, very small neck. It's a little tricky to see in this picture, but that's about what his neck looks like. And that's pretty thin compared to the rest of his body. It's a wonder his head stays on. And you'll notice that where it's torso, his shoulders are about like that and his waist is down here. He doesn't have much of a curve, I guess, like an angle running from his shoulders down to his waist. He's just kind of like a block or a cylinder, I suppose. Unlike Odin, who had that very severe angle running from his shoulders down to his waist. Now Wirt's arms and legs, it's trickier to see with his arms because his cape is covering them, but his legs are very, very skinny. There's not much definition in there either. It's just kind of one straight line. He has no indication of having knees, and honestly the only reason you can see his elbows in this picture is because his arms are bent. If his arms were straight, there would be no indication of elbows at all. Now looking at Wirt's posture, again, he's got a very natural stance, pretty relaxed. He's got his chest puffed out a little bit, but again, no hunch, no crouching. He's all good there. Alright, so looking at the proportions of the face. So looking at Odin again first, like most cartoon characters, he's got pretty large round eyes, although he does kind of have that almondy shape, I guess, that regular people have, that shape. If you'll notice though, Odin actually has square pupils. This image you can see it in pretty well, but his pupils aren't round like everybody else's are. His head, looking at just the actual head itself, he doesn't have a lot of room up here. The crown, or the cranium, I don't remember what it's called, but he doesn't have a whole lot going for him up there, not much room for a brain. And now looking at his ears, his nose, and his eyebrows. I think these are just all character traits, but he's got very, very large ears, he's got a very long nose as well, and he's got ridiculously thick eyebrows. Those are almost like caterpillars growing on his face. They are very, very large, and again, I think it's just part of his character. But and his mouth. So Odin doesn't really have, like, he's got indication of an upper lip, but no indication of a bottom lip. So he's kind of got lips, but not quite. Not the whole package. Looking at Wirt, like I said earlier, he's got a very, very large round head, just a giant circle. Same goes for his eyes. He doesn't have the kind of almondy shape that most people have. That, or like Odin does, I guess. They're just, again, big circles. And if you'll notice, his eyes don't have irises, they're just pupils. Either that or his irises are just black, which would honestly be really terrifying. And he doesn't really have eyebrows either. They're just kind of straight little lines. Not like Odin's. His ears are very, very big and very round. And I think, again, that's just part of his character. That his ears are very large and very round. His nose, though, all of the characters have these noses, just the kind of triangle shape. None of them have nostrils, and there's not a whole lot of variation between them. Oh no, that's a lie. No, I lied. Okay, there's a lot of variation between characters, but his nose is just this little triangle that's a little discolored, not much detail going on there. And Wirt, looking at his mouth again, he doesn't have any indication of lips at all. It's just that straight little line. No lips whatsoever. Come on. Alright, so looking at the most defining characteristics. I just pulled a couple characters from each of the respective cartoons. So looking at the characters from Ava's Demon, I think the most defining characteristic for these guys is that they all have different shaped pupils. Odin has a square, Maggie here has a triangle, and Gil actually has diamonds. And they all have something to do with their character, that's how they relate back, but none of the, or not very many of the characters in that webcomic have circular pupils, so I think that's the most defining characteristic for them. Now for the guys from Over the Garden Wall, I think the most defining characteristic would have to be kind of the the simplicity of it all, and that's a pretty big thing, but I mean, if you look, there's no variation in the lines whatsoever. They're all just one type of line used for everything. Like I'm talking about the outlines here. Like there's no thickness difference. All the outlines are the same color. It's just one solid kind of outline. There's no kind of illusion of something else, I suppose. What you see is what you get with them. Come on. Alright, so looking at the lines used, the realistic qualities, the color used, and the mood created by these guys. So looking at Ava's Demon, the lines used in Ava's Demon, they're pretty sketchy. Most of them are actually fairly dark too. The sketchiness isn't so much in the outline of the characters, but in the painting itself. It's just very loose, very free-flowing. All of the lines are there for a reason. Nothing is out of place. Everything means something, and everything has a purpose here. Looking at the color use here is very, very well done. You can pick up a mood, or you can pick up the mood that's supposed to be set just by looking at the colors, and you can kind of figure it out from Odin that he's just the colors that are used on him, like the colors of his hair and his eyes and the shirt that he's wearing, and the light that he's always placing in. That he's a very dark character. He's really removed from everybody. He's doesn't really associate well with people, and all from the color. That's pretty good. Looking at the realistic qualities, so from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being 1 is totally abstract and out there, and 10 being very, very realistic. So I'd put the guys from Ava's Demon at about an 8. They're still pretty cartoony, but more or less they retain the typical human proportions. I mean, his head to body ratio was 6, almost 6, compared to some of the other cartoon characters like these guys where it was 3.5. So I'd say that's pretty good, and he has more or less like this regular facial features other than the ridiculously large eyebrows and his pupils, he's got a pretty regular nose and a mouth and ears and all that, so I'd say they're doing pretty good. Alright, now looking at the guys from Over the Garden Wall. So looking at the lines used, they're, like I said in the other slide, they're pretty simple lines. There's just one line used for every outline, I guess not counting the backgrounds, just looking at the characters. One thickness, one kind of line, there's no sketchiness about it, there's just the one solid outline. So what you see is what you get, there's no in between going on there. Looking at the use of color, these guys did a pretty good use of color. The unfortunate thing is there's not a whole lot of shading in here. Again, other than the background, there's just kind of the one solid block of color used for each area. Like where its hat here is just one red. There's no shading going on. In some of the other angles, there is a bit of cell shading, so where it's just kind of one set shade, I guess, one set shadow color. There we go. That's used for almost everything, and it's just a very simple, you can tell exactly where the shadow starts and ends, not like the kind of blending that goes on in here over with Odin and Ava's Demon. And the mood created, so Over the Garden Wall is a cartoon aimed at for a younger audience, so the mood is kind of innocent, very childlike, and you can kind of see that by the simplicity of it all. So because there's no kind of sort of where it's, there could be, like where there's a sketchy kind of line that implies that something could be there, but it could also not be there. It's just very definite, very, it's, you take it at its face value, what you see is what you get. Now looking at the realistic qualities for these guys on our scale again from 1 to 10, 1 being totally abstract and 10 being hyper realistic, I'd put these guys at probably a 3 or a 4. They still look like people, of course, because they're cartoon characters, but they were, like, I mean, they got huge eyeballs, they got really, really big heads, their noses don't have a whole lot of definition to them either, there's no nostrils or anything like that, just little triangles or a little circle for a nose. So I'd say those guys are closer, definitely closer to a 1 than they are a 10. Alright, so that's my presentation. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.